The night was a hollow stretch of road when Evan Holt arrived at the edge of nowhere. His car, coated with road dust and fatigue, rolled to a stop beneath a crooked neon sign that buzzed with a dying pulse. Vacancy. The motel crouched in the dark like a relic, its windows blind, its silence heavier than the rain, whispering across the windshield. Inside the front office, a bell waited to be rung. Behind the counter, shadows moved. Or maybe they didn't. Evan wiped condensation from the glass door, hesitated, then stepped into a stale room that smelled faintly of rust and memory. The night clerk, Mrs. Kettering, emerged with a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her voice was slow, deliberate, as she slid the register toward him. He signed without looking at the names above his own, though something in the looping handwriting caught his attention. Room 237. The key's metal tag was cold in his hand, the number engraved deep like a scar. Outside, the wind changed, carrying a sound that could have been a door shutting, or something breathing. The door to room 237 resisted like something alive. Evan forced it open, releasing a stale gust that carried the scent of wet carpet and something metallic beneath it. The single lamp inside struggled against the dark, casting long, trembling shadows across faded wallpaper. A single picture hung crooked above the bed, a black and white photo of the motel from decades ago, its windows bright, its guests smiling. He set his suitcase down, the springs of the bed groaning under the shift of air. As he turned to shut the door, he caught a reflection in the mirror. Movement, subtle, deliberate, behind him. But when he spun around, the room was still. Sleep eluded him. The hum of the sign outside bled through the walls, pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. Evan sat at the small desk, flipping open the motel's guest ledgerhead brought from the office. A habit of curiosity. The inked names were decades old, yet some appeared written yesterday, the same looping hand repeating itself across years. He traced the most recent entry, E. Holt, room 237. The realization sank like ice. Sometime past midnight, a sound stirred above him. Footsteps, slow and uneven, pacing back and forth. But there was no second floor. Evan froze, listening as the rhythm shifted, crossing directly over where he sat. Each creak seemed to press closer, until dust fell from the ceiling in faint spirals. Then, abruptly, silence. The kind that feels aware of you. He rose slowly, drawn toward the mirror as if pulled by gravity. His reflection swayed slightly out of sync, a fraction too late. He raised his hand. The reflection didn't follow. The glass clouded suddenly, as though something on the other side exhaled. In that mist, faint letters formed. Still here. Dawn crept through the thin curtains like a reluctant ghost, draining the color from everything it touched. Evan hadn't slept. The words on the mirror had vanished, but their impressions still burned in his mind. Searching for reason, he opened the bedside drawer, half expecting a Bible. Instead, he found a photograph, curled edges, black and white, depicting a family standing proudly in front of the same motel decades earlier. In the center stood a young boy, smiling too wide for the occasion. The father's hand rested stiffly on his shoulder. On the back, written in faded ink, Room 237, our first night. A chill rippled through Evan as he realized the boy's eyes bore the same shade as his own. Evan found Mrs. Kettering back in the office, her cardigan replaced with a robe patterned in old flowers. She was already watching him before he entered. Her expression softened, almost pitying. "Sleep well?" she asked, voice thin. He didn't answer. Instead, he set the photo on the counter. Her eyes lingered on it for too long, and for a heartbeat her lips twitched, not into a smile, but something like grief. "Some guests never really leave," she whispered, then turned her gaze toward the parking lot where the fog refused to lift. Driven by restless curiosity, Evan began exploring the silent hallway, each step echoing like footsteps in a tomb. Room 238's door hung slightly open. Inside, dust-covered furniture stood frozen in abandonment, a suitcase still on the bed, clothes neatly folded as if awaiting return. He lifted the lid of the suitcase and found another key inside, this one etched. 237A. It wasn't part of the motel's numbering system. Beneath it lay a Polaroid photo of Mrs. Yi, Kettering, decades younger, her arm around the same smiling boy from the earlier photo. Behind the reception counter, a narrow door waited, locked until now. The new key fit with unsettling precision. The hinges groaned as he descended into the basement, flashlight slicing through layers of stale air. The walls were lined with broken furniture, boxes, and inexplicably, dozens of old room keys strung together like charms against something unseen. Each one bore a number scratched out, except for one tag gleaming untouched. 237. The hum of the building grew louder down here, mechanical yet rhythmic, like breathing under the floorboards. At the far end of the basement stood an old reel-to-reel recorder surrounded by stacks of labeled tapes. Guest check-in, room 237, March 1987. Evan pressed play. A hiss filled the air, followed by voices. First laughter, then screams. A man shouting orders, the sound of running feet, a door slamming, and then, faintly, a child's sob, repeating a phrase over and over. "Please, don't make me stay." The tape whirred to its end. Upstairs, a door creaked, open by itself. The motel had fallen into a hush so complete it pressed against Evan's ears. He lay awake, the red digits of the bedside clock frozen on 3-7. Then, a knock. Soft, deliberate. 3 times. It came from room 237's door. He held his breath. The air thickened, heavy with damp silence. Another knock, closer this time, resonating through the wood like a pulse. His hand drifted toward the handle, but stopped midair. The temperature dropped sharply, his breath visible. The knocking ceased, replaced by a slow, dragging sound retreating down the hall. He forced himself to look through the peephole. Nothing. Only the dim corridor stretching endlessly, every door shut, except his own reflection caught faintly in the glass, a moment too late. Morning came gray and soundless. Evan sat again before the recorder, determined to find logic in the chaos. He rewound the tape, adjusted volume, and pressed play. This time, amid static, another voice emerged, calm, firm, reciting a ledger of names. Holt, Leland, Carter, Kettering. He froze. The list ended with a whisper. "The caretaker always returns." The tape hissed, looped, and began again. But this time, the final name changed. It whispered his own. Later that afternoon, searching for any rational proof of his sanity, Evan began tapping along the wall behind the bed. Hollow. He peeled back the wallpaper, revealing a seam, a hidden door. Nails and paint had sealed it long ago, but the outline was unmistakable. He used a screwdriver to pry it open. The wall exhaled a stale draft carrying a faint melody, like a lullaby played from a broken music box. He aimed his flashlight through the gap and saw a narrow passage descending deeper into the earth, where no foundation should exist. Evan crawled through the narrow passage until it opened into a chamber below the motel. The walls were lined with mirrors, each fractured yet reflecting him from impossible angles. On the floor sat a chair facing an empty frame as if awaiting a subject. In the center, a photo projector, silent and dust-covered. He pressed the switch. The bulb flickered to life, casting the same family photo he'd found earlier onto the cracked wall. Only this time there were 4 people in the image, and he was one of them. As the projector clicked through its final frames, the mirrors began to fog from within, obscuring his reflection. Then movement. Something shifted behind the glass, its form mirroring his posture, but lagging just enough to be wrong. It lifted its hand palm against the mirror, and from within the glass pressed outward as though it might break through. Evan stumbled back, flashlight trembling. The final frame of the projector burned, freezing the image, his own face. Staring back, eyes blackened. The hum of the motel deepened to a heartbeat. When Evan climbed back through the hidden passage, the motel was no longer silent. A low electrical hum crawled beneath the wallpaper, vibrating through every wall. The lights flickered erratically, syncing with his pulse. He unplugged the bedside lamp, yet it continued to glow faintly, its bulb pulsing like a heartbeat trapped in glass. The television, though disconnected, sputtered to life, displaying snow and fractured silhouettes that shifted in rhythm with the flickering sign outside. As he leaned closer, a voice whispered through the static, not from the speaker, but from behind the screen. It called his name. Driven by dread and compulsion, Evan returned to the lobby. The registry book lay open, though he hadn't left it that way. Names sprawled across new pages in smeared ink, the handwriting uneven, desperate. He flipped through. Pages that hadn't existed before were now filled, each bearing dates stretching back half a century. Every few entries, one name repeated like a refrain. Evan Holt. The ink seemed wet, as though freshly written. Behind the counter, the air rippled faintly, and he realized the shadow there wasn't his own. Mrs. Kettering appeared behind him, silent. Her eyes were softer now. Not human softness, but the kind of pity that comes from someone who has watched too many stay too long. "You found it," she murmured. He turned, demanding answers, but her gaze drifted toward the ceiling. "The rooms remember who they keep," she said. "You shouldn't have taken that key." Her hand trembled as she reached for something beneath the counter, a small brass locket. She placed it on the ledger and stepped back, whispering, "He never left either." Evan opened the locket with shaking fingers. Inside, 2 tiny photographs faced each other, one of Mrs. Kettering as a young woman, and the other of the same boy from the family photo, his smile now seeming forced. Behind the images, a folded strip of film was tucked, brittle with age. He held it to the light. It showed a man, tied to a chair in room 237, surrounded by blurred silhouettes. The expression of terror was unmistakable. It was his own face. Evan stumbled back toward his room as the motel's hum rose to a steady, pulsing rhythm. Each light flickered out behind him, plunging the corridor into advancing darkness. When he reached room 237, the door stood ajar, swaying gently as though someone had just passed through. He stepped inside. The air felt heavier, thicker, filled with static. The mirror had cleared. His reflection was waiting, standing perfectly still, its lips curling into a slow, knowing smile. Then it spoke, though his own mouth did not move. "You were always here." The air in room 237 hung still, dense with static and the faint smell of ozone. Evan's reflection remained perfectly composed in the mirror, breathing when he did not. Its eyes followed him, tracking each hesitant motion with quiet intent. The walls pulsed faintly, a rhythm synchronized with the pounding in his skull. He moved closer, every step echoed by his double's subtle delay. "Who are you?" he whispered, voice brittle. The reflection tilted its head slightly, almost curious. Then, with unnatural calm, it raised a hand and pressed its palm flat against the glass from within. Frost spread outward from its touch, spider-webbing the surface in pale veins. Evan reached out, trembling, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name. The instant his skin met the mirror, the temperature dropped sharply. The light flickered, and for a heartbeat he felt a pull, as if the glass were liquid, tugging him inward. His reflection smiled wider. impossibly wider, and mouthed words he couldn't hear. Then the glass cracked beneath his hand, and something behind it whispered, "You already know." The motel's corridor seemed longer now, as if space itself had stretched to accommodate something unseen. Every door he passed mirrored his reflection in its dark window pane, hundreds of him, each slightly altered, each watching. Some smiled faintly, others stood with their heads tilted at unnatural angles. The fluorescent lights above flickered in a pattern too deliberate to be random, illuminating his doppelgangers one by one, like a sequence of ghosts taking turns to breathe. When he reached the end of the hall, there was a door that shouldn't exist. Room 0. Its number was carved directly into the wood, gouged deep, fresh. He touched the knob and felt a heartbeat beneath the metal, slow and steady. From behind the door came muffled voices overlapping, his own layered and distorted, pleading and furious all at once. The air grew thick, pulling at his chest, as if urging him to open it. Inside Room 0, the world smelled of dust and worn circuitry. The walls were lined with reel-to-reel recorders stacked floor to ceiling, each spinning slowly despite no power source. Their tapes looped endlessly, whispering fragmented sentences in overlapping cadence. Evan stepped carefully, his reflection still visible in the gleaming reels, distorted and stretched. One recorder in the center emitted a steady hum. The tape threaded through it bore a small label: playback. Subject 237. He pressed a button. Instantly, the room filled with overlapping voices of everyone who had ever stayed in the motel, whispering pieces of memory, apologies, screams, laughter. But within the chaos, one voice rose clear, his own voice, older and weary. "I told you not to come back." His stomach knotted. He leaned closer to the recorder as static swallowed the room, and from the reels something began to crawl out. Not physically, but as if the sound itself thickened into form. The motel's geometry had turned against reason. Evan found himself back in room 237, though he hadn't left room 0. The mirror stood flawless again, reflecting him faithfully. He stared at it, exhausted, trying to find evidence of the fracture he'd seen earlier. None. Then the light shifted, not from the lamp, but from inside the reflection. The other Evan now wore a different expression, calm, almost serene. Slowly, the reflection stepped backward, revealing more of the room behind it. But that room wasn't his. It was brighter, cleaner, as though time had reversed within it. On the bed lay the family from the photo, frozen in silence, their faces serene yet hollow. The reflection turned to them, then back to him, and extended a hand through the surface. The mirror rippled like water, beckoning him to cross. "It's not your world anymore," the reflection mouthed. The air thickened with static and faint whispering that rose to a roar. Evan screamed as he lunged toward the mirror, but instead of shattering outward, the glass exploded inward, swallowing him whole. He fell through weightless darkness before landing in a perfect replica of room 237, identical in every detail, except reversed. The neon light from outside now read backward through the window. His reflection was gone. He was inside it. The mirror on the wall now showed the room he'd come from, the original, where another version of himself stood staring, horrified, pounding at the glass. He tried to speak, to call out, but no sound left his throat. The air pressed down around him, thick with electricity. On the desk sat the motel ledger, pages turning on their own. The ink formed words as he watched. Caretaker. Evan Holt. The truth unfurled cold and merciless. He hadn't come here seeking work. He'd come home. Evan ran through the reversed version of the motel, heart hammering against ribs like a warning bell. Every door he passed led to the same hallway, folding back upon itself. The wallpaper, once pale green, now pulsed faintly beneath the surface, veins of light, tracing patterns like circuitry beneath skin. The hum that once lived in the walls had become a voice, low, rhythmic, repeating words he couldn't quite understand. His breath echoed unnaturally, a second later than it should. When he stopped, the echo continued without him whispering his own name. Evan Holt. Evan Holt. The floor beneath him rippled as if the motel itself was breathing. He turned sharply and found all the doors gone except one. Room 237. Waiting, its number glowing faintly like a wound. Somewhere behind the walls, a slow knock began, rhythmic, beckoning him to return to where it all started. When Evan pushed open room 237's door, the air shimmered like heat on asphalt, and he stepped not into the room, but into a basement, one that stretched far beyond the motel's foundations. The walls were lined with decaying furniture, children's toys, and old suitcases half buried in dust. A flickering bulb hung from a cord that seemed to have no ceiling to anchor it. Beneath its sickly light sat an antique radio, whispering through static. He twisted its dial, and a man's voice emerged. Calm, composed, unmistakably his own. "Welcome back, caretaker." The room pulsed in response, and faint footsteps echoed above, though no floor should exist there. He realized with a hollow ache that the basement wasn't under the motel. It was the motel. Its underbelly alive and sentient, feeding on repetition and regret. Deeper into the underground, Evan discovered a door that felt colder than the air around it. When he opened it, the hinges exhaled a sigh, releasing a draft that smelled faintly of mildew and old photographs. Inside was a vast chamber filled with framed portraits, hundreds, maybe thousands, lining every wall. Each frame contained an image of someone standing in room 237, all different, yet all with eyes that mirrored his. He stepped closer and saw the newest portrait forming itself, the image developing in real time, grain by grain, until his own likeness stared back at him from within the frame. His heart faltered. As he watched, the reflection inside the portrait blinked independently, eyes tracking his every move. Beneath the frame, etched into the metal plaque, read simply, Caretaker 47. In the far corner, under a single cone of light, sat Mrs. Kettering, or what remained of her. Her skin shimmered faintly translucent, her eyes like pools of reflection without depth. "You've seen what it wants you to see," she said, her voice thin, fraying like an old tape. "Every caretaker believes he's the first. You'll believe that too, until the next one comes." Her body flickered between ages, young, middle-aged, old, cycling, like a reel of film stuck in perpetual rewind. "You think this place is cursed," she continued softly, "but it's just remembering itself." Evan took a step forward, but she raised a trembling hand. "You're not leaving. You're becoming." Her image blurred, dissolved into static light, and the chair creaked as though she had never been there. A metallic scraping echoed from the shadows, the sound of chains dragging. Evan turned, and there, behind a shifting wall, appeared a staircase spiraling down into complete blackness. He descended, step by step, the walls narrowing until he could barely move. The sound of dripping water grew louder, mingling with faint whispers. Finally, he reached a small room lit by a single lantern resting atop an old motel desk. On it sat the same guest ledger, open to a blank page. The pen beside it twitched, moved by an invisible hand, writing in slow, deliberate strokes. Caretaker 48, Evan Holt. The ink bled like veins across the page. The lantern dimmed, and a voice, his own, murmured from behind him, "Now, stay a while." He turned, but the doorway was gone. Only the mirror remained, waiting, patient, and cold. Evan stood motionless in the small underground room, his breath misting faintly in the lantern's dim halo. The ledger before him pulsed faintly, the ink still moving, spelling his name again and again as though engraving it into time itself. The pages turned of their own accord, faster and faster, until the book slammed shut with a sound that echoed like a heartbeat. When he looked up, the room had changed. The walls now bore faint outlines of doors, dozens of them, all numbered differently but none opening outward, only inward. One door, however, began to form more distinctly, its frame bleeding through the concrete like something being remembered. He stepped closer and saw the number etched into its surface. 237. The paint rippled wetly, as if freshly carved. Beneath it, in uneven lettering, appeared his own handwriting. "Welcome, Evan." His reflection shimmered faintly in the brass knob, smiling though his own face did not. When he touched it, the door breathed in. The moment he stepped through, the air shifted. He was back inside room 237, or something resembling it. Everything gleamed with impossible clarity. The wallpaper was no longer peeling, the carpet unstained, the air sweet with the faint scent of lilac. Outside the window, daylight shimmered across an endless horizon of sand. Not the world he knew, but a memory of one. A soft humming filled the space, melodic, maternal. On the nightstand rested the locket Mrs. Kettering had given him, perfectly new and shining. He opened it and found only one photograph now, his own face, smiling faintly. Then from the bathroom the faint sound of running water began, steady and rhythmic. Steam seeped under the door. He called out, but his voice came back layered, as if multiple versions of himself were answering in overlapping tones. The mirror above the dresser flickered once, then twice, before showing not the room, but the same hallway he'd first entered on his first night here. The knocking began again, 3 times, deliberate, patient. Evan froze. The sound came not from the door this time, but from the inside of the mirror. He stepped closer, pulse quickening. The reflection in the mirror showed him standing still, but the reflection's hand was raised, knocking lightly on the glass from within. Knock, 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 knock. His mouth went dry. He whispered, "What do you want?" The reflection smiled sadly and pointed toward the bed. Slowly, Evan turned. On the bed lay the registry book, open to the last page. Caretaker, 49. His own name already written. The air vibrated with an unseen current. He turned back toward the mirror, but his reflection was gone. Only the empty room stared back at him. Then a faint shadow appeared behind his reflection's absence, a shape standing just over his shoulder. The mirror's surface rippled once more, and Evan felt himself pulled forward, not by force, but by invitation. The reflection's absence became a doorway, its edges glowing faintly with the same amber hue as sunset. Beyond it lay a corridor of light, stretching into nothingness. He stepped through, and all sound ceased. The motel faded behind him, its structure dissolving into mist, leaving only echoes of his footsteps. Ahead, the air shimmered, filled with suspended dust motes, catching invisible currents. He reached out, and as his hand passed through the light, the hum returned. Soft, rhythmic, the same heartbeat that had followed him since his arrival. It wasn't the motel breathing anymore. It was him. The realization struck like a whisper. He was the foundation, the memory, the pulse that kept this place alive. Evan emerged into stillness, a vast, mirror-lined expanse stretching endlessly in every direction. Each surface reflected a version of the motel, each containing its own Evan frozen mid-motion, trapped mid-thought, mid-scream. Some wept. Others smiled serenely. He walked among them, feeling their gazes converge, until he reached the central mirror, larger than the rest, its surface calm as a lake. His reflection looked back with the same weary eyes, and this time, it spoke aloud. "It's not the place that haunts you," it said. It's what you left behind. The words echoed infinitely. His reflection extended its hand, and without hesitation, Evan reached back. The glass gave way like water, and for a brief moment, the two became one. Reflection and flesh indistinguishable. When the surface stilled, only the room remained. The key to room 237 hung on the wall hook, gleaming softly beneath the hum of a newly lit sign outside. Vacancy.